asking the Lord what to speak on. So we obviously did communion last week, breaking the bread, and we looked at Simeon and Anna, sort of at the end of the Christmas story. The only thing I got, sort of two things actually, one came after the other. The only word I got was sheep. So you've got a sermon about sheep. The other one was holiness, which sort of came a bit later. We'll leave that for the minute. That might come with sort of doing a study through one of the letters is probably the best way to look at that. And I need to get my head around that one a bit. But sheep. I kept debating, should I get a picture or something for the desk person to put up on the display. Might think, oh boy, this is going to be fun, isn't it? But sheep are mentioned 150 times plus in the Old Testament, and then in the New as well. Sheep are probably the most common animal mentioned in the Bible. And sheep and a lamb is so integral to our faith and to the whole picture of salvation that God gives all the way through the Bible. And particularly what we're going to look at is how are we compared to sheep in the Bible? Because God talks a lot about us being sheep and him being the shepherd. So hopefully today we're going to look at sheep. When I speak in a couple of weeks' time after Kerry next week, we'll look at the role of the shepherd, which is equally, if not more, important. But let's just do a few verses. We're not going to do all the ones going back in the Old Testament, because a lot of the verses are about people had flocks, people had sheep, gather your sheep, go and get your sheep, ping somebody else's sheep, etc. We don't need to go through all them, but there are lots and lots of about families and groups of people, and the people it's in the Bible owning flocks of sheep. I mean, if you want to find them quickly, but there's only like one verse each time or something. So, Psalm 100, verse 3. Know that the Lord is God. It's he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Psalm 78, 52. But he brought his people out like a flock, and he led them like sheep through the wilderness. New Testament, Matthew 9:36. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Talking about the end times, Matthew 25:32. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. 1 Peter 2:25. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you've returned to the shepherd and the overseer of your souls. And then probably the one that most relates in some ways, Isaiah 53, verse 6. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each one of us is turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Interesting then, a few verses on in Isaiah 53, it refers to Jesus even as a sheep. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, yet he opened not his mouth, or he made not a noise. Didn't protest in favour of his innocence. But we all, like sheep, have gone astray, have wandered off, done our own thing, gone our own way. The earliest things we see references in the Bible about sheep, apart from people owning loads of them, but why? Partly because they were often used as sacrificial animals. They were told in all of the Jewish laws, when they had to come and bring offerings, you could bring bulls and calves, but very often it was a sheep, it was a lamb. And we learned last week, poorer people, if you couldn't do that, you could bring pigeons or turtle doves. But sheep were often used in sacrifices, partly because you'd so many of them, and partly because God had ordained that it would be that animal because of the picture that we then see eventually of Jesus being the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. They're also a primary source of income in those ancient Middle Eastern cultures. You can get, if you want, it's not the best thing probably, but you can get milk from sheep. You can obviously get meat from sheep. You can get wool from sheep. In fact, if you probably look at all the animals that exist that we as humans can use and partake of in some way, the sheep's probably one of the most best. You get multiple uses out of. You can make clothes, you can feed and drink and that as well. And then, I mean, you get sheep milk, cheese and things like that, don't you? Not that I've ever had any. So there's a multiple use of sheep. In fact, people very often, if you were really well off in that, you were looked at by the flocks that you had. There's a lot of talk in the Bible about flocks and people being blessed when they had lots of flocks. But very often you were just the landowner. You owned it all. You weren't the person who looked after them. You hired people. You hired a shepherd to look after your sheep. One of the first verses we see in the Bible, Genesis 4:4, Abel comes and brings his sacrifice to the Lord. And it says he brought the fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And then Cain, it says, brought his offering, his brother, and he brought an offering of the grain of the ground because he tilled the ground and Abel looked after the flocks. And you get that most confusing passage a little bit, that God was pleased with Abel's sacrifice but not Cain's. And there's a little bit, is it because Cain brought offerings of harvest and grain and things like that and didn't bring a lamb, but then he didn't look after the lamb? But we know more it was the attitude in his heart when he brought the offering than specifically what he brought. But right at the beginning there, Genesis 4:4, the 4th chapter in, we already see about Abel bringing the sacrifice of the firstborn of his flock. The Bible doesn't say it's specifically a lamb, but if you say the word flock, you're normally talking a lamb. You could be talking goats, possibly. We also see earlier, remember, when Adam and Eve had just sinned against the Lord and they come into the garden and they're hiding from the Lord and they were naked, and God, it says, clothed them. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. Genesis 3:21. Again, it doesn't state explicitly they're sheepskins, but they had to be the garment of the skin of some animal. And again, the one that comes to mind and that we use could well have been sheep. So already God is showing the importance of lambs as sacrificial animals. God already says, in the garden he's showing, and he says again in Hebrews 9:22, we often look at, sin can only be forgiven through the shedding of blood. The only thing that can forgive and pay the price for sin is blood of an animal, but later of a perfect, spotless human being. God showed us sin can only be given through the shed blood of the innocent. So while sheep were a major source of income in those societies, shepherding was one of the lowliest occupations. So even though sheep buy your flocks and everything, you're a great landowner and that, you get money in that from that. To be a shepherd was like the complete opposite end of the spectrum. You're one of the most lowly jobs that there was. We often say that, we pick that up. We pick that up at Christmas time when the angel appeared to the shepherds. Wealthy landowners often hired out the job of tending sheep to boys and unqualified men rather than more dignified labour. The youngest child in a family often had the job of tending the sheep. That's what we see about King David, don't we? When Samuel came to anoint one of the sons of Jesse. And he goes through all the sons in order from the oldest downwards and gets to the last one that was literally there at the time at the feast. And none of them God has said is the one he wants. He says, have you got any more? He says, oh, just the youngest, he's away tending the sheep. And they send for David, and he's God's appointed and the one that Samuel anoints. David the shepherd boy was considered so insignificant his own father didn't include him as a candidate for kingship. Jesus, you'll see next time, refers very often in the Bible, and particularly Psalm 23, that he is our shepherd. He's the great shepherd of the sheep. The Lord is my shepherd. We'll look at these things next time. But interesting, and Jesus always humbles himself. He always lowers himself. He always takes the lowest place, even though he's the highest person. Born in a stable, humble himself and come as a man, as a human being, one of his created. His name and everything humbles him down. I'll be a shepherd of the sheep, the lowest job that there is. Demonstrates his meekness, the fact he even came for the lowliest of the low. There's loads more verses in the Bible, the Old Testament, particularly in the prophets, where God compares Israel to sheep. They're lost, they're without a shepherd, they don't know what they're doing, they just wander around, they need to be looked after and cared for. Go remind you that at Christmas, when Jesus is born and he's in the stable, the first people possibly see him, again, it's not absolutely clear, is it? It's probably the animals that were there as well. But then who's the very first people that God goes to? So Mary's had an angel appear to her, Gabriel, and tell her about she's going to have this baby. Joseph has a dream. The shepherds don't just get one angel, the shepherds get a whole host of angels. So do the sheep. The sheep don't understand because they're sheep. But the sheep and the shepherds get the whole heavenly host appearing on the hillside, singing glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace be to men, as we sing in the Christmas carols. And then later, to the wise men that come, the other end of the spectrum. They're rich, they're powerful, they bring expensive gifts. What do the shepherds bring? We must take a gift when we go to see this king that's been born. They take him a lamb. They take him a lamb. They haven't got anything else. You can have my cloak or something if you want, you can have my socks. But they've got nothing else. They bring what they have. There's a beautiful lesson in that. We can only ever bring what we have. They hadn't got gold and frankincense and myrrh. We'll take him a lamb. Take the lamb of God a lamb. What a picture. So that's sort of background on sheep. But what are some of the things about sheep? A lot of this obviously I've read and thinking up on. I don't know tons about sheep. They're big, white, messy, woolly things that aren't white for very long. They go round in flocks. But first of all, sheep are one of the few animals that do not have a defence system. A lot of animals are born, you think, you can run fast, you can bark or growl loudly, you've been given some type of armour protection, you've got horns possibly. A lot of the animals have some way to defend themselves that they've been given as part of creation, but not sheep. Sheep virtually can do nothing for themselves at all. They're completely clueless. They understand they have to eat grass. That's about it. Sheep are completely helpless without a shepherd to look after them. That's partly what, and again we won't do, Psalm 23. The Lord's my shepherd, I lack nothing. We'll come back to that. Do you know that sheep, if a sheep falls over on its back, particularly if it's rather a large sheep, and it's either very thick wool that's not been like sheared on it, or it's pregnant, or it might be injured, very often it can't get itself back up. Cannot get itself out of danger and sort itself out. It needs some help. There's even videos on the internet about how to help. If you come across it, go on a walk, come across a sheep on its own lying in a problem position, of how to put them back correctly so you don't hurt them. I didn't watch it, but I saw coming across it. But if you're interested. But they need help. They're completely helpless without somebody who will look after them and protect them. I don't know which came first. You often talk about lemmings, don't you, sort of following each other off a cliff. I don't know which came first, lemmings or sheep. But sheep are a bit the same. Sheep are notorious for following a leader. Regardless of how dangerous or foolish that might be, they will all follow each other. One runs, they'll all run and follow the one that runs. They almost don't know what to do themselves. They've got no idea. We'll just do what everybody else is doing around me. Herd mentality. There's stories, and even one of them, I think, and sort of trial they did, which is a bit bad really, but if a sheep goes over the edge of a cliff, the rest will just follow him. They've got no idea at all. They'll just follow each other into danger. They did a trial once, and they let some sheep out of like a pen and put some rope across. So the sheep were jumping the rope to get out. No problem, you know, safe height, whatever. The sheep jumped over it. They took the rope down. All the sheep behind kept jumping. The rope that wasn't there anymore. Because they're just copying the one that's in front of them. Don't think for themselves. But we as sheep as well, because we've got to think in this, maybe not going back sometimes explaining or thinking that relates to us. You can think in your head as I'm talking, it relates to us. We maybe do have a defence system. You might argue in a sense humans as the highest of the created order have the best defence system, partly because of our mind and our brain, our thinking, our ability to speak and things. We can get ourselves out of situations by our words. But we do need somebody to look after us, somebody higher than us. We can't always protect ourselves, and particularly not when you get into thinking spiritually against the enemy that we have against us. So often as humans, we're very foolish. We do foolish things. We're very easy at following the crowd and following everybody else. So many people get led astray, particularly when you're young, teenagers and that, because they follow their mates. They want to be part of it. They want to feel in the in crowd. Even if somewhere in their head they know what they're doing is wrong, they'll do it because it's more important to be feel part of the group than it is to be the one that stands up against them. See, that mentality we see even in Jesus' time. He gets towards the end of his life. When he's coming down from the Mount of Olives down into Jerusalem, and he's on the back of the donkey. And the whole crowd is there shouting and praising and throwing down the palm branches. Some of it's joining in with everybody else. And then there he was a few days later. And Pilate said, who do you want me to crucify, Jesus or Barabbas? And the crowd stirs up and they're stirred up and they all join in. Crucify Jesus, save Barabbas. That herd mentality. Another reason human beings are compared to sheep in the Bible, which goes back to the Isaiah 53 verse. Sheep are prone to wander away from the flock. Sheep are very prone, even though they follow each other, to wander off. So there is a little bit of initiative there. There's a nice bit of grass over there, and suddenly, the others are going off over that way. I'm going for this bit of grass over here. Oh, where's all my friends gone? Where's all the other sheep gone? And now you're on your own. And now you don't know where you are. And now you're lost. A sheep's only chance of survival is with the flock under the care of a competent shepherd. Yet sheep can become overconfident, rebellious, or distracted very easy, and they wander away. They spy greener grass in the other direction or fail to notice when the flock moves away. Peter warns in 1 Peter 5:8, beware of the devil who prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. A lion or any animal, if you watched any of the nature programs, there's lots of them been on at the moment, particularly ones about hyenas and lions and leopards, I think, on the Sunday night. No animal, even at the top of the food chain, attacks a flock. They prowl around, they look for the one. The youngest one, the gazelle or whatever, the one that's lagging behind, the one that's ran the opposite way when the rest of them ran off when they heard the lion, and one runs off on its own. They'll pick the one off. The same with sheep and a wolf. That picture, our enemy the devil prowls around like a lion, seeking whom to devour. A lion does not attack the flock, waits till there's a solitary lamb that wanders too far away from the shepherd on its own. One of the main dangers and things to be careful of. But another parable Jesus tells, and this in a sense goes back to the shepherd more. Who was it that goes after the one? When there's the 99. Because one's wandered off and the shepherd realises one's not there and he counts them. And he goes and goes in search of the one lost lamb. So all is not all is not lost. Because Jesus will come after that one that's wandered off. Sheep, we said, follow others blindly. Don't know about the rope thing. Sheep do, despite all I've said about them, sheep are emotional. They do recognise their shepherd's voice. So despite whatever we think of sheep and limited intelligence, they do recognise the voice of the shepherd that cares for them, that's there all the time. They learn to recognise his voice above any other and know the difference. They have a remarkable instinct for knowing the voice of their shepherd. Amazingly, they will fear a stranger's voice and flee. When they don't know you and that, they'll run away. Since they're emotional, they also have the ability to build friendships with other sheep. In fact, they can get anxious, distressed, or feel sad when their sheep friends are gone. And hence, even though they could wander off because they're distracted, they have a flock mentality that actually they appreciate their safest place, and they know that makes them happiest is when they are around other sheep. Just like sheep, we can often get anxious, distressed, feel sadness. In those times, you need both the shepherd and you need the other sheep. It's why God, in his wisdom, created the church. Apart from, sadly, places where our brothers and sisters can't meet together regularly, but still desire and long for, where possible, some contact in some way, whether it's secretly, messaging, or occasionally that, somebody does, people visits them and things. God knew the safest place, if he sees each church, in a sense, as a flock of sheep, knows the safest thing is when they're together, and that they're there for each other. And if we don't know the shepherd's voice, it's very easy to be led off by a stranger's voice and to encounter real harm. Jesus says in John 10:27, and we'll look at this again next time, he's talking about he's the gate of the sheepfold that the sheep are in. He says part of that, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. My sheep hear my voice, they know my voice. I'm the shepherd that they know, because they recognise my voice from any other. Sheep are not meant to carry burdens. Again, different animals have different roles. Sheep are really good, we said, for food and wool. Other animals you have specifically, you get to donkeys and you get to horses, asses and oxen and things, are for carrying things. They can pull things like a plough and everything, and they can, you load things onto them to carry. Other animals are good for carrying things, not sheep. You'll never see a sheep carrying a pack on their back. If you do, take a picture, because it's going to be very rare. They're not meant to carry a heavy load. In fact, they would be crushed under such a heavy burden. If you put a big weight on a sheep, his legs are going to go like that. And you're not going to be able to get him up again. And a bit like that, we often carry heavy burdens as people, even as Christians. And Jesus says, doesn't he, even we sang in one of those songs about coming to the altar, or Jesus says, come, anybody who thirsts, come and drink from me, from my well, for my burden's light. We weren't meant to carry all our burdens either. We're to give them to Jesus, our heavy load, so he can carry it for us or with us. Psalm 55:22, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. Sheep often as well, in wanting to wander and everything and that, it's not a good thing, will often settle for less than actually they could have. When sheep are thirsty, they'll stop at a dirty puddle right in front of them, instead of going for the clean, still waters that are just in front of them. Because the puddle's nearer and it's easy. Sadly, they're content with filth as long as it satisfies at the moment. Furthermore, they'll often smell and not even know it. Truthfully, they lack the discernment and the judgment, and frankly don't know what's good for them. How often like us sometimes? We'll settle for second best. We'll go for what's easy. It's easy sometimes to give in to temptation than to fight against it. They're content to be filthy and stinky, even though they don't have to be. Again, they need a shepherd. He leads them to better things and cleans them up when no one else will touch them. Sheep will only lie down if they feel absolutely safe, as safe as they can be, content within themselves, that the shepherd's with them, that they know the shepherd, they know his voice, he's there to protect them, they're in a good place with good food. Only then will they settle down. And again, Psalm 23. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside the still waters. The other thing, despite what we've said, sheep are valuable. Despite them being what we've said, smelly, thick, they're treated as prized possessions because of their value. You're counted a wealthy man if you own large flocks, because of the meat, the milk, the wool. Addition, they produce offspring. One of the things sheep do very well is have more sheep. You can keep increasing your flocks. Shepherds made many sacrifices to make sure their flocks were protected. Their livelihood was at stake. Shepherd, it says, it talks about Jesus, is the one who protects the sheep. David talks about, I've fought off lion and bear to protect the sheep that I've looked after. That's why I've got some experience when he comes against Goliath. They would almost give their life to protect the sheep because they're so valuable. Jesus, our shepherd, would give his life. How much more precious are we than smelly sheep? God compares us to sheep in the Bible because he views us as priceless. Sheep fight things that are good for them. There were 5 lessons from a guy who, it was interesting. I was doing like Googling things about sheep and lessons learned in the Bible and things. It's a guy who went out to New Zealand to help out there. Apparently there's umpteen million more sheep than human beings out in New Zealand, which is why you get your New Zealand lamb. But he talked about what he learned from the sheep who were there. They hate having vaccines. They'll do anything with their heads and butt them around and anything to stop being vaccinated, even though the vaccine is good for them. They have trust issues. They won't go anywhere unless they can see where they're going. The best way to help a sheep is to grab its head and point it. And provided it can sort of see that that's clear, it will go that way. Sheep need community. They're safer. We covered that. They're easily distracted. And they'll follow each other no matter what. But we need to stop there. The only lesson out of all that, well, 2 lessons. Jesus calls us sheep. God calls us sheep. So even if you disagree, you're disagreeing with God. But actually he's right, because there's a lot of similar characteristics. And the only other thing is, sheep need a shepherd. The conclusion of all that, really, sheep need a shepherd. The thing that keeps them safe, protects them, and that is a shepherd.